Some selectors accept prefixes. It's usually O for Opera, WebKit for Chrome and Safari, MS for Microsoft, which is Internet Explorer, and Moz for Mozilla Firefox. The reason we would use a prefix in front of any of our selectors is when you might be using a property that might not work in another browser. This is usually the case for a newer CSS property. For a while, opacity wasn't a CSS recommendation, so every browser had its own version of doing it. So when you use a prefix, you're telling that one browser to follow this action. So to look at this, we have a body, so it's going to select everything in our body. Font weight is normal. If WebKit does not support the font weight property, then it's going to bold everything. So in theory, this would tell the WebKit browsers, which is Chrome and Safari, to bold the text inside the body element, or the entire page as this would be. However, because the font weight is already supported in CSS, and it is a CSS recommendation, so every browser will support this, the browser most likely will not support the prefixed version, because this is old news to Chrome or Safari, which is WebKit. So let's go over the prefixes, just so you can get a view of what they actually look like. So with a prefix, we always start with a dash, the prefix, and then another dash, and then a property. And then we could add our value in there. But really, this is what we're focusing on right now. So we have MS for Microsoft Internet Explorer, MOZ, Mozilla Firefox, O for Opera, and WebKit for Chrome and Safari. WebKit is an important one just because it affects both Chrome and Safari browsers. It's kind of a twofer. Now there is a rule for prefixes. Many developers will put their prefixes after the regular property. For example, if we had a transition, they put the transition property up here, then they try to support it in WebKit, Mozilla, Opera, and Internet Explorer, but what they did wrong was they put the transition up here. So how this should look is you would get rid of transition at the top, and you'd put it at the bottom. You always want your prefixes above the regular version, and this is for a couple reasons. One, if you're creating a website and you don't plan on updating the CSS all the time, and you are using something it's not quite a full CSS recommendation yet, and every browser kind of does this a little bit differently, then you're going to want to try the WebKit. You'll want to try Moz, Opera, and MS. In the event that this changes over time, let's say you were creating this website and you published it today, and then tomorrow the CSS recommendation came out, and then every browser updates, and transition all of a sudden is supported. Now your browser is going to try these. If you're using Internet Explorer, it's not going to use this, it's not going to use this, and it's not going to use this just because it doesn't recognize it. It might still support this. However, if it is now CSS recommendation, it's going to recognize this. However, it's going to replace it with this one. And that's because in a cascading style sheet, anything that is supported should be at the bottom. It goes from top to bottom in a style sheet. So there is a little bit more to it. I'm not going to get too much into it. It's not too important to really know why. It's just important that this is the rule and that it is followed all the time. You do not want to put your transition up here if you were using the transition property. You always want to put your transition at the bottom after you tried it with the prefixes. So to go over the prefixes again, this is exactly how it would look. We have dash, MOZ, dash, and then our property and our value for Firefox. We have Mozilla, and that's where we get the MOZ from. The dash O dash property and then value, which is Opera. See the O like that. MS, Microsoft, Internet Explorer, and then WebKit. This one doesn't really stand for anything. You just have to know that it's for Chrome and Safari. Also, if you don't have Internet Explorer, Opera, Chrome, Firefox, and Safari, and you do plan to create full-blown websites in the future, and you want them to be perfect across the 5 major browsers, which is what most of the world uses now, you might want to go and download those now. And this way, when you're trying out a website, if you're not completely sure of the CSS that you're using, then definitely open up all 5 browsers and give your website a shot in all 5 of them. And as a heads up, it will most likely be Internet Explorer that will give you a hard time. If you get frustrated with this, don't worry, all the other developers in the world feel the exact same way you do. And those are the prefixes.